Carly. I'm so excited to have you here with me on the Entheogenica podcast for a conversation about women and descent and the wild and the dark and the body and all of these beautiful pieces, and to share a little bit about your beautiful book and all of the wonderful wisdom that's there in Descent and Rising, Women's Stories, and the Embodiment of the Inanna Myth. And I'm only just in the kind of beginnings of reading the book, and immediately I'm like, yes, this is a book that I will be asking women that are working with me to read, because I can feel how deeply valuable, and I love the way you have tracked this story so beautifully as a kind of a process and as a identifying this rite of passage. So thank you for being with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me. And yeah, I'm really glad that you're enjoying the book, and I'm excited to talk about it more with you.
Yeah, thank you. So where are you from? Where in the world are you?
So I'm in Sheffield in the UK, and this is where I was born. So yeah, North England.
North England, beautiful. I'm very passionate myself about supporting this kind of reweaving of the rewilding traditions of European women as well, and this kind of lineage that we have been disconnected from and in many ways forgotten
Mm.
through, you know, the persecution and the witch hunts and all of the hunts of the wise women, I suppose. And I feel that there's this really deep passion re-emerging in the psyche of, you know, women. I'm from Ireland, you're from England, women from across Europe, to really reconnect into this innate wisdom that connects their bodies so deeply to the place of their birth or their land, or, you know, even if it's not necessarily the ancestral land, but that connection to the plants and the flora and the fauna. And I feel that, you know, your work is really tied into supporting women with that descent back down into the body. And I know your background is in psychotherapy, is that correct?
Yeah. So I'm a psychotherapist, but I was also a yoga teacher for 20 years and a dancer before that. So I've always been rooted in the body. And as a psychotherapist, it's very much somatic psychotherapy. So always working with that mind body connection rather than just kind of, as so much of our culture is now, like this walking head kind of staying up in the mind so often and not really coming down into the body or the body of the earth as a result. Yeah.
Mm. Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Tell me a little bit about your journey. So, with this birthing and with Inanna arriving as I imagine, as a guide for you, as a sort of an archetypical force that allowed you to process as you have processed with this beautiful writing. What was that like? How did she arrive?
So she arrived at a time in my life where a lot of different things were dissolving. So relationships were dissolving, my sense of my place in the world was dissolving, my sense of what work I was supposed to be doing. Um, and so I was reading a book. I was kind of going through a lot of grief at the time, and I picked up a book by a woman called Linda Hartley called Servants of the Sacred Dream that I highly recommend as well. And inside of that was the Inanna Myth. And I was just like, oh my God, this is my life. How is a 5,000-year-old myth literally telling me the stages that I've been going through in my life? And I just couldn't believe it. It was like some sort of magic, you know. And it completely captivated me because I realized that there must be something archetypal about the rite of passage that I was walking. And I don't think I knew it was a rite of passage before that moment. So it consecrated my personal life experience into a much, much bigger landscape. Um, the landscape, I guess, of the sacred, and also the that that archetypal human journey that actually so many of us walk but don't realize. And without that consecration and that reflection, I think we can lose that deeper rooting into the journey that is so powerful and gives so much meaning to the challenges and losses and griefs that we experience.
You've touched on something deeply resonant here, which for me is around, I muse on these kind of two streams of rites of passage or initiation, because on the one hand, I do believe that we can curate, and we can speak a little bit more about this in a moment, we can curate spaces for rites of passage, for kind of, crossing thresholds and whatnot. And this can be something that is curated in a lot of shamanistic societies still. But there's also this piece around the rites of passage that we go through in life. Like for me, I think a big rite of passage was the death of my father, holding space for him, on his deathbed as he passed. It was a pivotal moment for me in my life. The birth of my daughter, these phases. So what I'm hearing you say is there's something in the bringing consciousness to the moment, like bringing an awareness that you are moving through a rite of passage, and bringing that reverence, I suppose, to the moment, rather than maybe being disembodied and sort of moving along with the motions. So I'd love to hear you speak to this piece, to this quality.
So I feel like it's something about the way that we draw up consciousness out of the dark of the underworld of the things that we traverse that really helps us to grow in a way that we can't do without those maps, without the witness, some sort of witness. And I feel like what's missing a lot in modern culture, modern Western culture at least, is the community that holds the rite of passage and kind of lets us know in that holding that something deeper is at work here. And I think that for me, that book and the myth became the community of holding. And very fortunately for me, I also started working with my teacher, Kim Rosen, at that time, who does a lot of shamanic work and holding and practices. And I entered a community that could hold and did hold that descent and rising process very consciously. So that helped as well. But there's something about that that's really missing, I think, increasingly. And also our culture seems to increasingly pathologize these moments, rather than holding them as a rite of passage. And I think there's a real empowerment in holding them as a rite of passage, even if they're tremendously difficult moments. In fact, especially if they're tremendously difficult moments, because it fortifies something inside us, but not only inside us, but inside of the connective tissue of our humanity and our connection with that erotic life energy that does necessarily die and rebirth and die and rebirth and die and rebirth. And this sort of linear, I should always be okay, and if I'm not, I'll medicate it or fix it, or, this kind of culture of domination over these moments of rites of passage that make us surrender, that make us, in the myth, Ereshkigal says, Inanna must come naked and bowed low. And I think these moments of rites of passage usually make us fall down onto our knees and hit that point of hopelessness at some point, of absolute wreckage. And out of that, something else beyond our current understanding can emerge. Without the holding and without the witnessing, sometimes we can get lost in the underworld for a very long time, or permanently through psychosis or deep depressions, etc. So I think that witnessing part is so essential and really needs reclaiming inside of our culture somehow.
Somehow, yeah, yeah. Yeah, this speaks and sings to me of just from my own journey, and my mother actually has been a really big influence for me in kind of finding my way to embodying the mystery, the desire to really work with the earth and work with the community, because she went through what Stanislav Grof would call a spiritual emergency about 15 years ago. And in holding space for this process, and thankfully being drawn to literature and being drawn to communities where it was able to remodel that, no, this is not a psychosis, this is actually an immensely deep grief that is emerging because there is a deep fire, there is a deep connection actually to creation, to the world, to the natural world, that is bubbling and emerging and breaking, and it's ferocious, and it's also kind of, I think, representative of where we haven't had this community, where we haven't had eldership, and we've been moving through rites of passage or descent, but we haven't had that kind of guide to say it's okay, to hold our hand, and how that can lead to such an utter destruction when eventually the velocity of whatever is trying to emerge awakens, and then we can have incidences like a spiritual crisis. And since I had that experience and I walked there, and since then I have walked with many women who are in spiritual emergency, and just held space and been with them for however long that required. Something I've been very conscious of is that I think a lot of people that are experiencing, when women in this instance, we speak to women that are experiencing mental health crisis, are actually potentially moving through these rites of passage, but are lacking, like you say, this community and this guidance, this language, this story to make sense of the intensity of what they're feeling and what's arising. As a psychotherapist, I'd love to hear your reflections, and not as a psychotherapist, as a woman, as a woman deeply connected to the descent and the ascent. What's your thoughts on that?
So it just broke up a tiny bit at the end of the question. Would you mind just
Yeah,
repeating? You said the
I will, of
psychotherapist,
course.
and the last part of
Yeah.
the question, sorry.
Psychotherapist, and as a woman who's deeply connected to the story of the descent and the wisdom of the descent, what's your thoughts on women that are maybe experiencing mental health issues? That is this potentially a link to a form of initiation or a rite of passage that's wanting to emerge?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, again, in our culture, we've kind of separated mental health issues off to be like it's just in our heads. And this is a misnomer. It's not true, right? Like, if we're struggling with our mental health, then there's something deeper in our bodies that needs tending to. And this is why I love the myth so much, is that those 7 gates that Inanna descends through take her down out of her head, back into her body, all the way down to her roots, her vulva, her roots based in community. And at each gate, we're stripped of the ideas that kind of have kept us up there, thinking that there's, in a sense, is there something wrong with you, in inverted commas? The culture tells you that if you've got mental health issue, there's something wrong with you. Well, in a way, actually, if we're waking up, there's something deeply right going on, in my opinion. And maybe a lot of the mental health issues that are going on are a sort of appropriate response to the systems that we're living in that aren't working. And so many women have experienced trauma and abuse through misogynistic society. And then they go to help to the sky god medical professionals that we are told to go to in the absence of community or a wise elder. And some doctors and medical professions do embody that. And great, if you're lucky, if you find one, brilliant. And I'm, so grateful for those. Many medical professionals themselves don't understand these rites of passage. And we pathologize, and then what is actually moving is not bore witness to. And then we get stuck in the underworld, usually with medication to kind of just get us by in life, which to me is a real loss, not only to that individual, but to society, because if we can move through these rites of passage and be initiated into the depths of our embodied selves, usually what comes out of it is an amazing creativity that then benefits the world that we're living in as well as us. So I feel like this is personal work, but it's personal work that benefits the collective when we really do it. And just one more thing to add, which I haven't spoken about a lot on the podcast that I've been on. You mentioned psychosis, and there's two key moments in the myth where psychosis and deep depression can ensue, and they are moments where the witness comes in. So the first one is when she goes to descend and she calls in the witness Ninshaba to be her, to remain above ground as she goes under. So that might be a spiritual teacher. It might be you, Kathy, in your work. It might be me as a psychotherapist, that as we want to go back down into the body, we need someone to stay above ground and bang the drum for us, to basically be an anchor whilst we descend back down. And it's also then the psychotherapist or the space holder then also acts as a symbol or a mirror for the inner witness inside of us, and teaches us, we're kind of working then together to understand how to witness and behold ourselves as we dive down into our subconscious material and embodied trauma and pains and whatever is there to be met. And so that's vital, because if we don't have the witness, that's where we can get lost in the underworld and not be able to return. And the second moment where the witness is vitally important is as we rise out of the underworld. And the witness, or just before we rise actually, and the witness there is the inner masculine witness. So we have a feminine aspect of our witnessing and we have a masculine. And these are Enki's emissaries that are actually made out of the dirt from under his fingernails. So the earth, actually, it's an earth witness. And I think this is also to do with structure, with the physical structure that holds us. And these come down into the underworld, and all they do is empathize. They're an empathic witnessing. All they do with Ereshkigal is she's going, oh, my heart, oh, my back. She's feeling her pain as she re-enters her body. And they go, oh, your heart, oh, your back. And she goes, who are you? Because she's never been witnessed. And so she's been held in the dark in her pain by herself. And in that moment, again, learning to be a compassionate witness for ourselves through our own inner masculine as well is also vitally important. And again, if Ereshkigal doesn't get that witnessing, then the waters of life cannot flow and we cannot rise. So I feel like the myth really holds teachings about what we're doing as space holders and what we're doing as the space holder inside of ourselves as well.
Wow. There's just so much emerging, listening to you reflect this. And there's a beauty here for me in that this sort of a rising of the feminine, female bodied, I'm speaking to here, women, really coming back into this role as guide and mentor and space holder, and there's such a huge awakening of this in our craft, right? And so many women leaving mainstream occupation to step into this role. And almost what I'm seeing is like this huge preparation of so many of us, like just preparing to hold this space for each other and to hold this space for our communities. And that's really powerful and touching for me to watch it through that lens of, yes, we're here to hold space for the descent, because humanity is in a massive descent. I mean, it has been, and it's kind of accumulating at this very moment in time.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it just? Gosh. And that's one of the amazing things about Inanna. You know, she's a triple goddess that emerged from ancient Sumeria, which is now modern day Iraq, so Middle East, where so much of the conflict, the heart of the conflict, is happening and has been happening for a long time. And she was the triple goddess of sexuality, war, and love. And I feel a bit moved actually talking about this at this time, because it's just so horrendous what's happening in the world at the moment. And I feel like what Inanna is teaching us is to really come to know how that violence and those conflicts and those wars are happening inside of us. You know, this myth is a really visceral, at times violent myth. Ereshkigal, when the two sisters meet in the underworld, Ereshkigal stakes her with a meat hook and hangs her up to rot on the wall. It's like she's murderous in that moment. There is a war here. And I feel like that warring is part of our humanity that really needs to be reckoned with. And it is so in our faces right now with the technology that we're seeing these things play out in real time. And it's deeply painful and bewildering and horrifying. And yet this myth seems to be big enough to hold some of the teachings that are emerging for us as a collective at the moment, that unfortunately our political leaders just do not seem to have a clue about. Though I do see some amazing people standing up in those spaces and really speaking from their hearts in trying to bring some consciousness to those political spaces. But yeah, there are so many, going back to the women, there are so many women, as you say, who are really doing this work, really reckoning with the dark parts of themselves and our culture, and really trying to stand together in weaving a new narrative from the ground up. And I find that deeply heartening, because I think that so much of the media and the political rhetoric kind of makes you feel like there's absolutely, like, so disempowering. It's so disempowering to me. And then I meet with you and other women doing the work, and I remember that actually we can make change from the ground up, one person at a time, and build a new collective, some shift. So I hold hope in that.
Thank you. I'm really moved. I'm also almost close to tears, because it's like, just even to sit in this space and open conversation, and whoever, you know, if it's one woman, if it's 10 women, if it's 100, 1,000, it doesn't matter. But it's this, again, it's the witnessing. It's this witnessing of, like, we are in a time that's deeply challenging, and and for those of us who are really working to hold from the body, it's a journey to be able to be fortified enough. And I think this is a lot of what the rite of passage is, right? It's to be fortified enough that we can then go out and like you say, flow the river into our communities, which means also holding, witnessing, and being able to empathize, just like each of these aspects of the guidance. And that requires fortification. And we remind each other that we are more fortified than we realize when we gather, when we speak, when we share story. And it reminds me of this piece of, you know, Ereshkigal hooking Inanna onto this meat hook and hanging her. It reminds me very much of I've done a lot of research into various shamanic initiations from around the world, reading archaic techniques of ecstasy by Mircea Eliade, and you see this consistency in this kind of the spirit initiation is often what they call demonic or daemonic. It's these kind of like underworld, often grotesque beings that will come and maybe visit the shaman in vision or in dream state and dismember. There's like a dismembering that occurs. And so I see this reflection of Inanna's tale as a very shamanistic way of understanding that this is part of our, it's a deep, rich part of all of the world. It may have emerged in ancient Sumeria, but it's as relevant for me as an Irish woman as it is for you as an English woman in terms of this ancestral wisdom, technology that calls for this descent. It's an innate part of who we are as human beings. And I'm curious about your thoughts on, I know you mention the vision quest in the book, and I'm deeply involved in emerging into nature and vigiling and working in that way. And I'd love to know, because I'm curious about these tools these wisdom bases that we're intuiting from different cultures, and how the vision quest has shown up in your life and how you see it could be a benefit for other women.
Mm-hmm. So in the book, I speak about how women's embodied vision questing initially comes through menstrual consciousness. And I really love that. I discovered it was Jules Heavens that first talked to me about that, another one of my past teachers. And this idea that we have to go out to vision quest, I think it's great. I have lots of friends who do those kind of vision quests, and I have a lot of respect for them. But I also think it's beautiful for women to remember that actually part of the way that we vision quest is actually going inside through the natural cyclical wisdom of our body. And that the what is embodied in the Inanna myth is the life, death, life cycle, and that is embodied in the menstrual cycle, in the 4 seasons of the menstrual cycle: spring coming up to summer when we ovulate, ovulation tipping down into autumn, and then the death part, which would be the Ereshkigal part of the menstrual cycle. And that how when we work with those energies in our dreams and our bodies and what's moving in our lives at those particular times, and how it relates to the moon and the seasons, how much insight and creativity and new depths of awareness we can find inside of that. And that really inspires me, because having lived in a culture that is, menstrual shame is endemic, and I was just not, again, it was a missed rite of passage for me. I was not initiated into I was initiated in the absence of the rite of passage. That was the rite of passage. My body was ignored. The wisdom of that rite of passage was ignored. I didn't learn about it till I was in my 30s. So there's that aspect of vision questing that I love. And then the other way that I have worked a lot with journeying is through breath work. And again, the reason I absolutely love the breath work is because all we need is our own body, our own breath, a beholder initially, although I can now breathe alone in the practice. But I think initially it's really vital that we have a beholder, and we breathe down into the underworld of our body and meet what's there. And the thing I love about using breath work as the vision quest is that when we move the river of the breath inside the body, the breath bumps into the holding, the kind of dark parts that have been so held and trapped, like Ereshkigal in the underworld. And the breath moves into those. And the river of the breath starts to shift into that if you like, demonic landscape. And I love the way Familiarises talks about the demons as the parts of us that haven't yet come to consciousness. Again, I really love that way of embracing the demonic energy as something inside us that's been held in the dark, that wants to come into service of our life energy and be to reveal its consciousness. And so it bumps into that Erish Kaggle, and then Erish Kaggle starts to show up inside of the body's expression in whatever way that is. That primal energy starts to reveal itself, and we are then schooled by that and shown and changed irrevocably by it. And a lot of the nervous system work that I've done has been through breath work, not through any other thing. I think our self-actualizing energy system knows how to work with these energies. It's, as you say, it's ancient. It's in our cellular structure. It's in the structure of our ancestors, in the ground we've emerged out of. It's there. It's there to be breathed. I just love it.
Yeah. I'm with you. As a breathwork practitioner myself, I remember when I first started to facilitate breathwork, and I can remember just writing up like little descriptions, and this word of, or this sentence of, activating your body's innate intelligence. And there's something so empowering about the breath practice of, yes, having a witness there and somebody to sit with you so you can go deeper, so you can feel safe to release. But it's this knowledge that it's just you, it's just your breath, it's just your body. There's no external interference, for want of a better word, or that's not quite the word I want to use, but something that's coming in from external. It's emerging, and it's you and your body and the potency of what you can meet. And I've had conversations about this with people who say, last night somebody asked me a question, a person who's a psychedelic practitioner said, have you got any advice on people preparing for psychedelic work? And I said, my response is always, for me, more like plant medicine work, for me personally, it's like the last port of call, as opposed to necessarily the first port of call, which I think is potentially a bit more common in the modern narrative, because I think breath work is, you may not even need to go to the entheogenic medicine. If you just commit to enough breath work, you'll see what you can resolve there. And then if you do decide you want to go that step further into a different type of altered state of consciousness, then you've really done so much work at clearing those channels and purifying those channels within, so that your nervous system is more primed, your trauma body has released without it all maybe emerging in this, sort of volcanic eruption of all things at once. And just the potency of the healing in breathwork. I'm there. I'm with you on really kind of voicing that for people that are curious about, well, how do I come into the body? How do I consciously work with healing or moving through these deeper layers? Then, as a somatic approach, I think breathwork is really one of the foundational and most whole practices that can really bring in everything from the visionary to the emotional to the nervous system to the somatic to the physical. You're touching on all of these layers in that space. With the nervous system, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I'm really glad to hear you saying that. I haven't heard that from many practitioners who work with plant medicine, and I don't work with plant medicine, and I haven't journeyed in that way. I've only journeyed through breath work. But I often say to people, if who come to me going, oh, it's breath work, blah blah blah. So it's really great for me to hear that insight from you. And I have found breath work to be enough for me. You know, I don't need to go to that other place. And I'm not criticizing anyone who does, but I do love that idea of working with the breath first and creating a foundation with which to work with plant medicine, if that is your path. I think that is a really wise, I really appreciate that wisdom that you're bringing.
Thank you. I'm grateful to hear that. Yeah, I've been working with a client of mine who's a psychiatrist, who's wanting to introduce plant medicines into psilocybin into her practice at some point, and it's been so gorgeous to weave with, you know, she's just one example of a woman who's wanting to interface with this technology and teaching this piece around, do we really understand the impact that these big journeys are having on the nervous system? Do we really understand the impact that they're having on the psyche? And are we giving people the best possibility of having a deeply integrated transformational experience? And I think this is a really important conversation about how can we slow down and actually create. Look at Inanna, we look at this story, we have these 7 gates. So really it's about, for me, it's about how do we create systems that acknowledge these 7 gates, that acknowledge that different tools may have a purpose at different times, but that it's a process. And our job really is to hold space for I think for slower, more whole, more held spaces for people to journey in whatever that looks like.
I couldn't agree more. And I feel like slowness, like you say, slowing down, because, and this is the thing about the descent, it is slow work, right? Like my descent and rising, well, it was 8 years, and then I'm still learning now, and I'm still learning about rising, you know, I'm still in the rising phase. So it's slow work, and our culture is so obsessed with quick, 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 and we can't, you know, I love the counter, I love the way this myth and the work and what you're speaking to, how countercultural it is, how it is about coming back to slow time, coming back to the erotic flow of life, which is slower. It's not that pornified quick fix. And it's so needed. It's so needed.
Oh, what a gift to feel that. I can even feel it. I can feel that sort of slow quality almost emerging even in the space between our nervous systems kind of calibrating to each other through conversation. And I'm really curious to hear some reflections from you on the nervous system, maybe for people that don't really maybe they're new to nervous system kind of understanding, and how this process, this piece of our being, this piece of our body, our nervous system, what is its kind of role, or how is it interfacing with this energy of descent, or the amount that it's processing in any given moment as we're moving through these experiences in life?
Mm, mm. Well, I think that's what another thing that really astounded me about the myth. I make the comment in the book about how I feel like it's one of the most ancient maps of trauma integration that we have. And of course, I can't imagine that in ancient Sumerian society they know about the kind of scientific information we know about trauma now. So how is that possible? And to me, it's testament to the innate wisdom of our healing tendency, if you like, that we want to come into relationship, that our body, it benefits the whole system if we're in relationship. And I think the thing is with trauma, it is the exile. It is. So Inanna is queen of the upper world. Ereshkigal is queen of the underworld. She was exiled there. She's been ignored. She's been put away into the dark and left. And that's what tends to happen with our trauma, that we have to exile some part of our aliveness because of something happening too fast, too soon, that was overwhelming to our system. And the only way to cope was to disassociate, literally separate from that experience. And with it, some part of our energetic aliveness gets exiled with it. And then what we tend to do is to stay in some sort of estrangement from this part for a very long time. And that takes a lot of our life energy. To keep a part of ourselves in the underworld is actually really exhausting. So it can show up as autoimmune issues, often for women, and mental health issues, depressions, anxieties, addictions, all of those things. And they all point to a dysregulation of the nervous system. And so when Inanna goes down into the body, down through the 7 gates to start to process and meet with what she's been estranged from, this is how we titrate and work with trauma. We go towards the wound rather than trying to get over it, fix it, change it. We go towards the wound and we ask the thing. So, say with the mental health issues, let's say anxiety is playing out, we would turn towards the anxiety and say, what do you need? What's the compassionate question in the old hero mythologies was, what ails thee? It's that empathy. So rather than trying to fix, oppress, get over, it's a different paradigm of healing. It's coming towards what's in the dark and gradually allowing it to become our teacher. And this is what we do when we work with trauma. And the beautiful thing is about trauma work is it doesn't mean that we necessarily have to go back over the story of what happened to us. We might, sometimes that's helpful, but sometimes it can be re-traumatizing. The actual experience of the trauma is somehow alive in our body here and now. And actually recent research has shown that the part of the brain that lights up when we're experiencing things going on in life that are a result of past trauma, it shows in the is like we're experiencing it like it's here in the present, and it lights up in the brain as if it's here in the present. And so that means if we work with the body, we can work with the trauma because it's here. It's not gone anywhere. We can't actually get away from it. We can try, we'll fail. So when we work with the body, it gives us a way of, excuse me, feeling how it's alive here and now and just being with that. And it's actually very gentle often. And can, but it takes slow time. It takes time and relationship and patience and a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion to be with these lost parts and dare to get to know them, because I think our fear is that we will be overwhelmed again, that it will kill us to go there. And actually, I find the opposite usually happens. It starts to bring us back to life.
Yeah, I just actually came last week from a 5-day intensive with my teacher. I'm studying Eugene Gendlin's practice of focusing, which is a somatic approach to just presencing, like you're saying, presencing with what is arising through the communication of the body. And I've been really blown away by the potential of having a witness or a listener in the form of whether it's a somatic psychotherapist or a trauma-informed therapist or whatnot. But what happens when we actually stop trying to process from the mind and allow the mind to sort of descend into the body mind and just, I'll give an example. I was working through some immense pain in my shoulder, down my arm, and just even sitting with that part where the body was speaking through this pain, and how by sort of allowing my awareness to drop into the sensation of the body, there was an emergence of a story in many ways that was able take me into this sort of deeper space of a trauma that I was carrying that was vibrating through my body in the form of this kind of nerve pain that was presenting. And this piece for people who are, for all of us, I think, because we all require these spaces, but this piece of when we recognize that the real way for healing is by coming into this communication with the voice of the body rather than trying to process everything through the logic, and how it subtly starts to release itself once it is witnessed from the self. Again, it comes back to this piece of the witnessing and the, almost like the guide that was above ground and Inanna down below, and that reconnection, that once that part is told, I see you, I feel you, I honor you in many ways for protecting and for getting us to this point, how revelationary it is. And I think once you move into the field of somatics, this is it. This is where the healing is happening. And so for anybody that's maybe looking for a route to move into these types of practices, have you got any recommendations? What should they look for? Who should they look for? Any ideas there?
So I have a deep trust for the way that we seek out our helpers in life. And, there are people that I've worked with that I could recommend, but I also have a deep trust for the way that, I wasn't looking for my teacher, Kim, and there she was. I did seek out my psychotherapist. I did do that. But again, it was through a bizarre little connection that was quite, but would it seem like it was chance? And yet these things happen, right? So I feel like what I would say to that is follow the thread that's emerging for you and go towards that, and it will lead you towards the people that you need. But certainly practices that are of the body are so, so important. I think there's only so far we can get with our mind, as you're saying as well. It's like, we're such a dissociative culture. We're so in our heads, and actually we really need to listen to the body because it's right there. It's right there waiting, all of the material. And I speak in the book about implicit memory. And implicit memory is that which is remembered inside. The body remembers, as Bessel van der Kolk's amazing book speaks to. So, and I feel like the body leads us towards our helpers as well. So, I trust that somehow, rather than recommending, because I could recommend someone and it would be right for one person and it wouldn't be right for 100, So, yeah, I think following that thread will lead us where we need to go. I really trust that.
Yeah, beautiful. And it resonates, the idea of the, on the hero or the heroine's journey, that these helpers appear as you're moving through the descent and they support you into the ascent. And it's like, follow that. Your soul knows, right? And once it's made the decision of, I'm calling in help, not I'm seeking or I'm looking for, I'm calling in help, then it just starts to show up in the most beautiful ways, and we are deeply supported. So I love your response there. I have a question. It's sort of twofold. So I'm going to present two concepts to you. So you speak about the virgin in the book. And where I wanted to kind of go here was around sort of our sexual energy and, the role of our sexual energy and the suppression of our sexual energy. And so I'm curious about this kind of linkage between reclaiming the virgin and also reclaiming this sort of force that resides within us as well.
Yeah. So I feel like one of the reasons I love the Inanna Myth so much is because it's so ancient and it predates patriarchy as we know it today. And I feel like a lot of the stories that emerged from Greek mythology and a lot of the more popular mythologies that we know, I think they're deeply useful and I have a lot of respect for them, but a lot of them have that patriarchal narrative running through them. And I think we need to be really conscious of that when we work with them, and not be afraid to dig and kind of look for the primal energies in there rather than the sort of propaganda that's been put on top. And I think that the virgin, the notion of virgin and what a virgin is a really good example of this, because obviously in the church-based religions, and as 4th century biblical writers created and worked with Jesus's story, one of the things that they put in there was this idea of virginity as being a woman who is chaste, untouched, and basically hasn't had sex and doesn't know her sexuality. And the more ancient definition of a virgin is actually, I later discovered, a woman who is basically sovereign to herself and is deeply knowledgeable from inside of herself. She one unto herself. And I was just so enlivened when I discovered that, because it makes absolute sense to me that there is this wellspring of deep wisdom, untouched wisdom inside of ourselves that emerges from inside of our sexuality, inside of that erotic aliveness that we all have inherently inside of us, that is not dependent on anybody else and can't be taken by anybody else. I mean, the thing that really gets me about this whole notion of virginity is this idea that it should be taken by a husband. You know, it's so disempowering, and again, it's so twisted. It is making a possession of a woman and female sexuality and female bodies. And so to reclaim the notion of the virgin as being the wisdom inside of us, that we are initiated into our virginity through these descents and risings, through these rites of passage, through knowing, through eating the apple and the self-knowledge that comes from eating that apple, from interaction with the earth, with our body, with our own fecundity. That to me resonates utterly in a way that that patriarchal, incredibly damaging idea about sex and what sex should be and how we're initiated into it just does not. Yeah.
Wow. I felt that. I have a deep relationship with the mythos and the essence of the goddess Hecate, and even her story has been somewhat distorted because people think she's a Greek goddess, but she's much older. Kind of Asia Minor, Anatolia, which would now be Turkey, and they link her back to the ancient goddess Sybil, who actually has further reaches back to Ishtar, Inanna Mythos as well. And she's also depicted as a virginal goddess, and it's been interesting because I've been on this journey with this expression of this word virgin and the archetype that's actually available to us that's been so hidden. And there's something really interesting in, because the crone's not hidden. You know, we understand the crone, we understand this idea of the elder, and we have the calloch, and we have these kind of like expressions. And obviously mother is, while we are re-entering and redefining our understanding of mother, there's still a primal knowing of what mother, you know, in its pure expression means. But for whatever reason, the virgin was heavily distorted and heavily hidden from our collective mythos and from our collective psyche. So I think that's a it's an interesting one for anybody that's curious to explore this deeper meaning of the word virgin, and kind of bringing back that reverence to the virgin within and reclaiming that mantle. I think it's a really important piece for that which was hidden. There is much reason why I believe it would be potentially hidden from us as we are, reclaiming our innate power. This piece around sacrifice, I know there's a chapter on it's one of the closing chapters on moving into this process of sacrifice as you've moved through and through this story and through this mythos. Speak to me a little bit about what that means for you as a woman, or for me as a woman, to contemplate.
Mm, mm. So I feel like it's so important that we are willing to make sacrifices as we rise. And I think that in my rising, there was a real want to hold on to, having gone through the death part of the descent. We're already exhausted, we've already been stripped, we've already let go of so much. And then as we rise, we have to let go again. And that was a real surprise to me. I didn't expect it. And it brought on what I call the second wave of grief. It was like, really? Another layer of this has to go? Another layer of what I thought I could just get away with holding on to this little slither here, And it was like, no, that has to go too. So, yeah, that was a really difficult time for me. And I feel like for me, it actually came in the form of a health initiation, because I had started to create women's courses around descent and rising. I was building community around the work. I was coming into myself in a way that I hadn't done for a long time. And then I went to the doctors for a hip issue that I'd had hip pain for a long time, and I wanted to get it checked out. And they came back and they found this little bit of bone right in the back of my left side of my hip and I think it's interesting that it's bone, because bone is so often linked to ancestry. And they didn't know what it was. And they reassured me and said, oh, I don't think it's anything serious, but we need to check in case it's cancer, because it's active. And it was a 3-month process in the end, of a lot of medical procedures that I would not have wanted, being injected with radioactive dyes, these kinds of things, and lots of CT scans, lots of radiation that I didn't want. And it ended in the January with, I went for a biopsy where they actually went into my hip under general anesthetic and clipped a bit of this bone. So it was like being impaled. It was on a full moon. And I was like, wow, I am being staked again, just as I'm rising. And it was this sacrifice. I had to give up so much of my work, so much of what I was doing, and just rest. And so it was almost like going back into the underworld again, just as I thought I was coming up. And the message seemed to be, okay, you've been listening, but this part you haven't listened to, and you are not allowed to rise without bringing this with you. And I had to let go of so much of the last little slithers of things that I'd been holding on to in my body, in my physical life. It felt like the last. But out of that sacrifice came a new depth of listening and appreciation for the finer details in life. It was that final slowdown that really brought me right back into the delicacy of aliveness, that then helped me create a new structure with which to rise. And I think that's the vulnerability of rising, is that we are continuing to walk naked above ground in a way, because we don't know what the structures are now, because so much is dissolved. And so how do we then walk with that fragility and create structures to support it as we're moving up into the world again? And sacrifice is part of that. What needs to let go? so that I can create a new structure of support, a new relationship with my inner masculine and the outer masculine in the world, so that I can rise. And how do I have compassion for myself in the sacrifices and the vulnerability that is a necessary part of rising? So, I mean, I've had women say, Tamara Albana, who I have great respect for, she's also written about Inanna and actually is from Iraq. And she was saying, you know, rising for her was the hardest part, not the descent. Actually, rising was the hardest part. And I think it's hard because when we're dying, we know it's hard and we're being held by the dying. It's like the structure of that death is holding us. When we rise, we're pioneering, and that is an edge. It's a necessary edge, right? Because nobody's walked it before. We haven't walked it before. And that's where the creativity, I think, blossoms. That's where we can really create new pathways that hopefully can have a ripple effect out into the world.
Wow. I just love this. It resonates so much, and I feel I'm in an ascent right now myself, and I'm in this space of complete and utter confusion. It's like I'm so confused about who am I, where am I going, what do I want to say, who what do I, it's just so it's a process. And you know, this isn't the first time that I've gone through a descent and an ascent, and this is the thing, it is a cycle that we meet at different stages, and they can have differences in their velocity, I suppose, is a way to look at it, you know.
Absolutely. I
And
really,
I
oh, sorry to interrupt.
yeah.
Carry on.
No, go ahead, go ahead. Sorry, there's a little delay, so go ahead.
Yeah, there is. I was just going to say, because I created lots of free resources in conversations about descent and rising, and the interview with Shameli Arda that is free to access via my website. She speaks to this so beautifully. And, you know, as an elder of this work, I see her as an elder of this work. She's sort of a decade or so on from it from me. And to hear about, as you say, that she had done many descents and risings. She had been doing goddess work and leading goddess work for decades, and she's just gone through a whole other one. And to hear her speak to that was really heartening to me, because yeah, there's no knowing how many times we have to walk these paths. And I totally resonate with what you're saying. We come out going, oh, and what do you want me to do now? Do you know, it's like, it's, yeah, it is so bewildering rising, necessarily so, I think. I really resonate with what you're saying.
Thank you. I'm gonna watch this this today, and that was actually what I was gonna close with, was how, you know, really for women to touch into this piece of how fundamental this storytelling is, this current modern storytelling of our experiences of the descent, of the death process, of the rise, of the sacrifice, that, and even in that, like, looping back to sort of what we opened with, which was this piece around mental wellness and anxiety. And it's, as we meet the story in our reality, or as we even share the story, there's so much healing that emerges from finding our voice within this experience, that every woman goes through this. You know, you or I are not special in any way. This is just putting voice to what we all go through. And this part, like, again, what you mentioned at the beginning, which was this lack of community. And I think one of the ways we reweave is through the sharing of our stories and letting ourselves just be witnessed in it. And there's so much beauty in that. So thank you for, you know, writing this book and creating this entry point for us to deepen our understanding of what we may be experiencing.
Mm, Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the recognition of storytelling and shared story, because I think that's why I wove women's stories into the book as such a sort of backbone of the book in a way, because I feel like it was a way of bringing the myth to life here and now. And as you say, this is something that we go through, and when we hear somebody else's story and we feel the Inanna Myth mapped onto it, it somehow, it consecrates, and it also, I think, really creates solidarity and daring to go down, because we can, we can shy away from the journey. But I think more and more women are really feeling the call to go towards the pain now and start to uncover what we've been estranged from. And yes, hearing others' stories really helps, I think, fortify us. You used that word earlier, fortify us, and give courage for the journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carly. It was such a joy to connect, and I look forward to connecting more with you in the future. And I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you.
Oh, likewise, Kathy. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been great.